Welcome to our deep dive into the world of Moses Mendelssohn. You're interested in philosophy, so we're going to explore the fascinating ideas of this influential figure in the German Enlightenment.
Yes.
We'll be using excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy to kind of guide our discussion.
Great.
It's going to be quite the intellectual adventure.
It really is remarkable to think that Mendelssohn, a Jewish philosopher born in 1729, thrived right in the heart of the Enlightenment, a time of immense intellectual ferment, but also, let's be honest, considerable religious tension.
It does make you wonder how he navigated that landscape. I mean, he was incredibly prolific, publishing works on metaphysics, aesthetics,
Right.
and Jewish identity.
Right.
He even had a close friendship with Gotthold Ephraim Lessing, a major figure in German literature.
Yes.
Where should we even begin with such a wide-ranging thinker?
Well, to truly grasp Mendelssohn's contributions, I think we need to start with his metaphysics, the foundation upon which much of his other work is built.
Okay, let's unpack that.
Okay.
What were the core principles of his metaphysics?
One of the central ideas in Mendelssohn's work is the concept of conceptual analysis as a method for attaining knowledge.
Right.
He explores this in his book on evidence in metaphysical sciences, where he argues that both mathematics and metaphysics rely on this method.
Hold on, math and metaphysics, those seem like totally different fields. How could they use the same approach?
That's the brilliance of Mendelssohn's insight. He recognized that both disciplines utilize conceptual analysis to uncover truths, though the nature of the evidence involved differs. For Mendelssohn, mathematics deals with quantity, while metaphysics grapples with qualities,
Okay.
the intrinsic characteristics of finite things.
So it's not just about the method, but the content of the concepts being analyzed. That's a subtle but important distinction.
Absolutely. And this distinction plays a crucial role in how Mendelssohn tackles a major philosophical problem, idealism.
Right.
He wrestled with the question of whether our perceptions accurately reflect an external reality, a question that has puzzled philosophers for centuries.
That's a fundamental question, especially if you're trying to build a solid metaphysical system. Did Mendelssohn lean towards idealism or realism?
He was very cautious. You see, he acknowledged that in mathematics, you don't necessarily need to prove the existence of an external reality because the relationships within mathematical concepts hold true even if everything is an illusion. But in metaphysics, when you're dealing with the qualities of things, you can't simply sidestep the question of whether those things actually exist.
So things get a bit more complex when we move from the realm of numbers to the realm of physical objects and their properties.
Precisely. And what's intriguing is that Mendelssohn seems to have shifted his thinking on idealism over time. In his later work, Morning Hours, he hints at a more nuanced perspective, suggesting that the debate between idealism and realism might stem from how we use language.
So he's suggesting that maybe it's not a problem with our perception of reality, but a problem with the limitations of language itself. That's fascinating.
Right. And this concern with the nuances and potential pitfalls of language popped up again and again in Mendelssohn's work. It's a recurring theme that connects different aspects of his thinking. But before we get to that, let's stick with this idea of idealism and how it plays out in one of Mendelssohn's most famous works, Phaedo, where he tackles the question of the immortality of the human soul.
Oh, yes. The book inspired by Plato's Dialogue. I remember reading about how Mendelssohn reimagines the Phaedo to explore the implications for humanity if there's no afterlife.
Exactly. And what's remarkable is how he skillfully interweaves philosophical arguments into this deeply moving and engaging dialogue. He argues that the soul, based on the nature of consciousness and self-awareness, is simple, meaning it's not composed of parts.
So if it's simple, it can't be broken down or destroyed, and therefore it must be immortal. That's a bold claim. I know even Immanuel Kant wasn't fully convinced by this argument.
You're right. Kant critiques Mendelssohn's argument in the Critique of Pure Reason, sparking a debate that captures the attention of any student of philosophy. But whether you agree with Mendelssohn or not, his argument is thought-provoking and highlights the power of his reasoning.
Speaking of thought-provoking arguments, we can't discuss Mendelssohn's metaphysics without mentioning his views on God.
Right.
He was a firm believer in God's existence. But he had specific criteria for the types of arguments he found persuasive. He rejected arguments from design, the idea that the complexity of the universe points to a creator. Instead, he favored demonstrable proofs.
And he provides two such proofs in Morning Hours.
Okay.
The first relies on the principle of sufficient reason. We know that we exist. We are contingent beings, meaning we could have not existed. For anything contingent to exist, there must be a reason, a cause.
Right.
Mendelssohn posits that the ultimate cause, the necessary being that explains the existence of everything contingent, is God.
So in essence, he's arguing, I exist, therefore something must have caused my existence, and that ultimate cause is God.
You got it. Now, his second proof is more intricate. It involves analyzing the very concept of God's non-existence. He argues that for something to not exist, it's either because it's inherently impossible, like a square circle, or because it's contingent on something else that is not present. However, God, by definition, is a perfect being. And a perfect being cannot be contingent. Contingency implies dependence, and a perfect being must be independent.
So if God's non-existence is impossible, then God must exist. It's a fascinating line of reasoning.
Exactly. You can see how meticulously Mendelssohn constructs his arguments. It's this rigor and clarity that make him such a compelling figure in the history of philosophy.
Yeah.
He tackles these fundamental questions head-on with a remarkable blend of logic and insight.
I can already see how his work influenced later thinkers like Kant. And we've only just scratched the surface.
Right.
There's so much more to explore.
Yeah.
His ethics, his aesthetics, his political theory.
And let's not forget his groundbreaking work on language and that dramatic controversy surrounding his friend Lessing's supposed pantheism. We have a lot more ground to cover.
Right.
But I'm curious what stands out to you so far about Mendelssohn's approach to metaphysics.
What really strikes me is his emphasis on conceptual analysis as a method, and the way he applies it to such a wide range of topics. He doesn't shy away from the big questions, and he approaches them with incredible intellectual honesty and rigor.
Absolutely, and that's what makes him so rewarding to study. He challenges us to think deeply about the nature of reality, knowledge, and even the very language we use to express those concepts.
Well, I'm eager to delve further into his thought.
Yeah.
Let's move on to his ethics and explore how those metaphysical principles inform his views on how we should live our lives.
Okay.
What do you say?
I'm ready when you are. His ethical theory is just as fascinating as his metaphysics. Trust me, you won't be disappointed.
Yeah.
So, Mendelssohn's ethical theory. It's deeply rooted in his metaphysical principles, particularly his emphasis on reason and the pursuit of perfection. He develops a unique form of perfectionism, one that incorporates not only reason but also elements of aesthetics and emotion, creating a surprisingly nuanced approach to moral philosophy.
That's intriguing. It's not the typical follow-the-rules kind of ethical system you often encounter. So how does Mendelssohn bring aesthetics and emotions into the picture?
One of the key concepts in his ethical theory is the idea of a moral syllogism, which he lays out in his prize essay. He argues that whenever we make a moral decision, we're engaging in a rational process, albeit often implicitly.
Okay, I'm curious. Break down this moral syllogism for me. How does it work?
Imagine it like this. The major premise of the syllogism is a general moral principle, a kind of maxim that we've learned or adopted. The minor premise is our assessment of the specific situation we're in, and the conclusion, driven by reason, is the action we decide to take.
So it's like our minds are constantly running these mini moral calculations, weighing principles against specific circumstances to figure out the right course of action.
Precisely. And for Mendelssohn, the foundation of these moral principles, which he calls laws of nature, lies in our inherent nature as rational beings. He goes to great lengths to demonstrate that these laws are not arbitrary, but stem from our very essence. He even offers 3 distinct proofs for this first law of nature, which states that we should strive to perfect ourselves and others.
3 proofs. That's impressive. What are these different ways of arriving at this fundamental moral law?
The first proof relies on observation. Mendelssohn argues that if we closely examine human behavior, we'll see that all our desires and inclinations, even those that lead to vice, aim at some form of perfection. Whether we're seeking to improve our inner state, our outer circumstances, or the well-being of others, we're all striving towards a perceived good.
So even when we make bad choices, we're still seeking some kind of perfection, even if it's misguided or incomplete?
Exactly. And from this universal human tendency towards perfection, he derives the first law of nature. Make your inner and outer state and that of others in proper proportion, as perfect as you can. It's a remarkably comprehensive principle that encompasses duties to ourselves, to others, and even to God.
That's a pretty powerful statement. What about the second proof? How does that differ from the observational approach?
His second proof, which he calls a priori, delves into the very nature of free will. And this is where aesthetics, the appreciation of beauty, comes into play.
Wait, aesthetics and free will. How are those connected?
Mendelssohn argues that a being with free will, by definition, chooses what it finds pleasing. and what we find pleasing, perfection, beauty, order. These qualities are inherently desirable to us.
So you're saying that our capacity for moral choice is intertwined with our aesthetic sensibilities, our attraction to beauty.
Precisely. And because perfection, beauty, and order are inherently desirable, they create a kind of moral necessity. A free, rational being must choose them. Not because of external pressure, but because it's in their very nature to do so.
That's a fascinating idea. But I can see how some might find this approach a bit too neat. Doesn't it downplay the internal struggle we often face between our desires and our moral obligations?
Mendelssohn acknowledges this tension. He doesn't deny the difficulty of consistently choosing the good. His point is that the foundation of morality lies in this deep-seated desire for perfection, which is intimately connected to our appreciation of beauty.
It sounds like he's weaving together different aspects of human experience in a way that we don't often consider. What about the third proof? How does that fit in?
His third proof connects morality to God's purpose in creating the world. Mendelssohn argues that if God created the world with wise and benevolent intentions, then God must desire the perfection of creation. And since God's will is always in accordance with what's best, God has the right to give us laws that guide us towards perfection.
So for Mendelssohn, morality isn't just a set of abstract rules, it's woven into the very fabric of creation, reflecting God's will for a more perfect world. It's a beautiful vision, but also a demanding one.
Indeed. Whether we arrive at this first law of nature through observation, through analyzing free will, or through contemplating God's purpose, it all leads back to this fundamental principle: perfect yourself and others.
It's a powerful and demanding principle for sure. But how do we actually apply this principle in our everyday lives? I mean, it's one thing to grasp the concept of perfection, but quite another to know what that means in specific situations.
That's where Mendelssohn emphasizes the importance of conscience and a fortunate sense for the truth, especially when faced with difficult moral choices. He's not suggesting we abandon reason, but he recognizes that in the heat of the moment, we often need to rely on these less clearly defined capacities to guide us.
So he's acknowledging the role of intuition and feeling in our moral decision-making, even within a system that emphasizes reason. That's a more nuanced view than I expected from an Enlightenment thinker.
Absolutely, and it's this balance of reason and sentiment that makes his ethics so compelling and relevant even today. He understood that knowing the right thing to do isn't always enough. Our desires and inclinations can pull us in different directions. He even offers practical strategies for aligning our reason and desires, cultivating good habits, appreciating art, and finding inspiration in examples of virtue.
It's amazing how he connects seemingly disparate realms: metaphysics, ethics, and aesthetics.
And speaking of aesthetics, that's another area where Mendelssohn truly shines. Recall his a priori proof for the first law of nature, where he connects our moral choices to our innate desire for perfection and beauty. Well, that's just a glimpse into his rich and fascinating aesthetic theory.
I'm eager to delve into that. How does he define beauty? It's such a slippery concept.
He begins by acknowledging beauty's immense power, calling it a self-empowered mistress of all our sentiments. He's captivated by how art captures and evokes this feeling of beauty. So he asks, what is it that natural beauty and artistic beauty share? What lies at the heart of beauty?
And I'm guessing he doesn't settle for easy answers like beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Not at all. He rejects purely subjective accounts of beauty, arguing that beauty resides in a sensuously perfect representation. Now, sensuous here doesn't simply refer to our five senses. It refers to a kind of perception where we grasp the whole of something without dissecting it intellectually.
So it's about experiencing the harmony and order of something directly without getting bogged down in analyzing its individual parts.
Exactly, and this applies to both natural beauty and artistic beauty. He argues that a work of art can be beautiful even if it depicts something ugly or disturbing, as long as the representation itself is sensuously perfect.
So it's the skill of the artist, the way they arrange the elements, that creates beauty. It's not just about the subject matter.
Precisely. He places a high value on artistry, on the genius involved in crafting these perfect representations. He even suggests that artistic beauty can in some ways surpass natural beauty because it involves this intentional shaping and refining of experience. But his aesthetic theory goes even further. He also explores these intriguing concepts of mixed sentiments and the sublime. Have you ever felt a strange mix of awe and terror when contemplating the vastness of the universe or the power of a raging storm?
Absolutely. Those experiences are both exhilarating and unsettling at the same time.
That's precisely what Mendelssohn is getting at with these ideas. He recognizes that not all aesthetic experiences are simply pleasurable. Some involve this blend of seemingly opposite emotions, like the pleasure we might derive from watching a tragedy where we're moved by the hero's suffering. He explains these mixed sentiments by suggesting that our response to art has both subjective and objective components.
Meaning that we can be drawn to the perfection of the representation itself, even when being repulsed by what's being represented.
Exactly. And when it comes to the sublime, he's particularly fascinated by how we respond to the boundless, to things that exceed our comprehension. He distinguishes between the extended immensity of something like the ocean and the intensive immensity of qualities like power, genius, or virtue. These intensive immensities evoke awe and wonder because they push us beyond the limits of our ordinary experience. And it's the perfect representation of these intensive immensities that he calls the sublime.
So the sublime isn't just about size or scale, it's about experiencing something that transcends our typical ways of thinking and feeling, something that evokes a sense of awe and wonder.
Precisely. And what makes Mendelssohn's aesthetic theory so groundbreaking is that he recognizes the uniqueness of aesthetic experience. He argues that it's distinct from both knowing and desiring. It's a third category of mental faculty. He even suggests that aesthetic experience can act as a bridge between knowledge and desire, influencing both how we understand the world and how we act within it.
It's almost as if, for Mendelssohn, aesthetics is this secret key to unlocking a deeper understanding of ourselves and the universe, a way of connecting to something larger than ourselves.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it's this recognition of the power of aesthetics that makes Mendelssohn such a fascinating and important figure in the history of philosophy. His ideas laid the groundwork for later thinkers, especially Kant.
It's incredible how his ideas ripple through the history of thought. But we still have more to explore with Mendelssohn. We need to dive into his political theory, his unique philosophy of language, and of course, that dramatic controversy surrounding his defense of Lessing against accusations of Spinozism.
Oh, trust me, those topics are just as fascinating as what we've covered so far. We'll uncover how Mendelssohn championed religious tolerance, explored the complex relationship between spoken and written language, and navigated a philosophical debate that had both personal and intellectual consequences for him. But before we move on, what aspects of Mendelssohn's ethics or aesthetics resonate most with you?
So we've covered quite a bit of ground with Mendelssohn's metaphysics, ethics, and aesthetics. But let's dive into his political theory now. It's fascinating how in his book Jerusalem, he tackles this incredibly controversial topic, well, at least in his time, the relationship between church and state.
It's really remarkable how he approaches this sensitive issue,
Yeah.
especially considering the context. We're talking about 18th century Prussia, a society deeply rooted in religious tradition and, let's be honest, not exactly known for its separation of powers.
Right, so how does Mendelssohn navigate this potentially explosive topic?
Well, with his signature blend of reason and nuance, of course, he argues for a clear distinction between church and state, but not in the way we might typically think about it today, like a separation of temporal and spiritual concerns. Instead, he bases it on the different types of power each institution holds.
Okay.
For Mendelssohn, both church and state are concerned with actions and convictions, how we live our lives, what we believe.
So if they both deal with how we act and what we believe, where's the dividing line? How can they be separated?
The key difference, according to Mendelssohn, lies in their authority to enforce their principles. He argues that the state has the right to coerce actions, to use physical power to maintain order and enforce laws. However, the church has no such right. Its power rests on persuasion. In love and beneficence, he says, not in force or coercion.
So it's a separation based on the means they can use to influence people, not necessarily on the content of their beliefs. That's a really interesting distinction.
Precisely. And he's not saying that the state shouldn't be concerned with morality or that religion has no place in public life. In fact, he sees a beautiful harmony between the two. He argues that the moral laws discovered through reason, ultimately, are the same as the divine laws revealed through religion. Religion, he says, simply adds a more exalted sanction to those duties.
So for Mendelssohn, there's no inherent conflict between reason and faith. They ultimately lead to the same moral principles. That's a pretty optimistic view.
It is, and this harmony, he believes, is essential for genuine religious tolerance. If both state and church recognize their limits and respect individual conscience, then there's no need for coercion or persecution. He envisions a society where diverse faiths can coexist peacefully, each contributing to the common good in its own way.
It's a vision that still resonates with us today. especially in societies grappling with religious pluralism. It's incredible how relevant his ideas remain. But his argument for religious tolerance goes even deeper. He makes this bold claim in Jerusalem that Judaism, at its core, is a natural religion, meaning that its essential truths are accessible to reason, not just revealed through Scripture.
That's right. And this argument sparked quite a bit of controversy, among more traditional Jewish thinkers. They accused him of undermining the authority of Jewish law and tradition. But Mendelssohn was unwavering in his belief that while Judaism has its unique laws and rituals, its fundamental moral principles are rooted in reason and can be discovered by anyone, regardless of their faith.
So he's presenting a kind of universalist argument about Judaism. Its ethical core transcends its particular historical and cultural context and speaks to a shared human experience.
Precisely. And to support this argument, he draws on his fascinating philosophy of language. Remember earlier how we discussed his concern about language, its potential to mislead us, to create these philosophical pseudo-problems. Well, in Jerusalem, he applies that same critical lens to language, particularly to the relationship between spoken and written language.
Right. He emphasizes the importance of oral tradition, right, in interpreting and transmitting Jewish law. He sees Judaism as a religion of the spoken word. Why is that so crucial to his argument?
Yeah, for several reasons. First, he views spoken language as inherently more dynamic and adaptable than written language. You see, words set in stone can become fixed, rigid, open to misinterpretations and distortions over time. But spoken language, especially within a living tradition, can evolve and respond to changing circumstances.
So it's about keeping the spirit of the law alive, allowing it to adapt and remain relevant rather than clinging rigidly to the letter of the law.
Exactly. And secondly, he connects this emphasis on spoken language to his critique of idolatry. He's worried about the tendency to fixate on the written word, to almost worship the text itself rather than the deeper meaning it represents. So he sees oral tradition, that ongoing dialogue within a community, as a kind of safeguard against this potential for idolatry.
That's such an interesting point. It's almost like he's anticipating the dangers of fundamentalism centuries before it became this widespread issue. He's highlighting the importance of interpretation, context, and lived experience in understanding religious teachings.
Right. For Mendelssohn, the focus should be on the practice of faith, on the lived experience of those laws and rituals, not just on the text as this static object.
His insights on language and interpretation are really remarkable. But we can't wrap up our deep dive into Mendelssohn without talking about that dramatic controversy with Friedrich Heinrich Jacobi over the alleged pantheism of their mutual friend Lessing.
Yes, the pantheism is straight. This controversy had a profound impact on Mendelssohn, both intellectually and personally.
It's a story with, well, incredibly high stakes. It's often said that this philosophical debate actually contributed to Mendelssohn's death.
It's a tragic tale. Jacobi published letters between himself and Lessing, claiming that Lessing had embraced Spinoza's pantheism, the idea that God and nature are one and the same. Jacobi argued that this was the inevitable endpoint of Enlightenment rationalism, a slippery slope towards atheism and moral relativism.
So Mendelssohn felt obligated to defend his friend's reputation and the legacy of the Enlightenment.
Exactly. He vehemently denied that Lessing was a Spinozist and argued passionately that pantheism was not a threat to religion or morality.
What were his main arguments against Spinozism?
Well, he challenged Spinoza's concept of a single, infinite substance, arguing that it couldn't adequately account for the diversity and individuality we observe in the world. He also criticized Spinoza for failing to explain the origin of motion and change, and for neglecting this crucial distinction between good and evil.
So he's essentially saying that Spinoza's system was too simplistic, too reductionist. It couldn't really capture the complexity of both the physical and the moral universe.
Yes. But what's intriguing is that Mendelssohn doesn't completely reject pantheism. He actually presents this more refined version of pantheism, one that incorporates key elements of theism, like the idea of a God who chooses the best possible world.
So he's trying to find a middle ground, a way to kind of reconcile pantheism with more traditional religious beliefs.
In a way, yes. Ultimately, he concludes that the difference between this refined pantheism and traditional theism is largely a matter of language, a merely verbal dispute, as he puts it. But the intensity of this debate and the tragic circumstances surrounding Mendelssohn's death demonstrate just how high the stakes were. This wasn't just some abstract philosophical exercise. It was a battle over the very soul of the Enlightenment, a struggle to define the relationship between reason, faith, and the nature of reality.
It's a powerful reminder that ideas have consequences. And these philosophical debates can have real-world implications. And as we've seen throughout this deep dive, Mendelssohn's contributions to these debates and to philosophy as a whole are profound and enduring. He wrestled with some of humanity's biggest questions: the nature of reality, the immortality of the soul, the foundations of morality, the meaning of beauty, and the relationship between faith and reason. And he did it all with this remarkable clarity, rigor, and a deep respect for the complexity of human experience.
His work continues to inspire and challenge us today, urging us to engage in reasoned discourse, embrace religious tolerance, and, well, persist in our quest for truth, beauty, and a meaningful life.
This has been an incredible journey through the world of Moses Mendelssohn. I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for his brilliance, his courage, and his enduring legacy. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and for those of you who want to explore Mendelssohn's thought further, we've included additional resources in the show notes.
It's been a pleasure. Mendelssohn's ideas are a gift that keeps on giving, and I encourage everyone to explore them further.